Morning, friends. How are we doing today? It's fair. Thank you for telling me. Well, I am getting ready to head to the doctor's office. It is my self-care healthcare day. So I have 3 appointments, or 2 appointments, and then another's like x-rays and labs that need to be done. Anyway, well, whatever you are up to today, I hope that you remember to get up at some point, stretch a little bit, drink some water, take your meds if that applies to you, eat something if you can, and I hope that you remember that you are loved, you matter. I'm so glad you're here with me. And I hope that you have a good day, or do what you need to do to survive the day. Can't believe the year is almost over. It's November, and I've basically been kind of journaling and reflecting and preparing to kind of start a whole new, I don't know what you call it. I don't really like saying New Year's resolutions necessarily. It's more like, I guess they're New Year's resolutions. I don't know why I feel like I have to give them fancy terms, but I don't wait for the new year. I start with the winter solstice, and then I use the different seasonal moments as touch points throughout the year. So like last year, I started my resolutions on winter solstice. I kind of talked about and mapped them out. And then spring equinox, summer solstice, and fall equinox are check-in points for me to reflect on how they're going, if I need to modify or change them, and I do. And sometimes might decide to get rid of some of them. And that's been really helpful for me, because as a person who's neurodiverse, who has chronic illness, mental health struggles, I can set goals all day long, but then I have to kind of deal with whatever life actually sends my way. Like, for example, when I started this channel, taking it seriously anyway, last spring, I was posting every day, and I did so for a few months. But the reality is, with my it's timely, with my health, I could not just continue to grind out videos that way. Honestly, it's the editing is what kind of messes me up at the end. The time it takes to edit and preview everything, check the music. It's actually more work for me than actually doing this part, which is filming anyway. So as we go about our day-to-day, I'll be kind of pausing to either be reading, or I'll be writing and journaling my thoughts about this year, how it's gone, in preparation for the end of year reflection during the winter solstice. I forgot what else I was going to say, so let's finish getting ready to go. I just realized that my appointment is at 8. My first appointment is at 8 a.m., not 8:30. So now I'm running late, and I'm trying to hustle. Normally, I think I get so upset about it because normally I can manage my time well when it comes to appointments. I've done really well with my calendars and my alarms to make sure I show up on time for things, because ideally my ideal self is a person who is always on time and always accomplishes what needs to be accomplished, regardless of the mental and physical limitations that I have. And the person I feel like people expect me to be is a person who shows up on time. So when the reality is that sometimes all the timers and alarms and calendar notifications in the world just don't work. And that's just a reality of living with ADHD. Yes, there are strategies that we can try to employ. There's ways that we can try to be better at it. But the truth is, there are just going to be days where we drop the ball. And that's a human thing. I think it's beyond ADHD. I think it's a human thing. But I have a hard time leaving myself space to be human which sounds silly when I say that out loud because of course I'm human, but anyway, hopefully I can at least not miss the whole thing. So it's definitely late for my physical therapy appointment. Thankfully he didn't have an appointment after mine, so I was still able to be seen. All right, so now we're gonna go get some labs done. At the first part of the test done, I had to do an EKG and an X-ray in preparation for my surgery. I can't remember if I told you, I'm doing a partial knee replacement in a few weeks. Anyway, so I've got like pre-op, I think is what they call it. Anyway, so I got I cannot talk today. X-ray and the EKG done, and now I have to get some blood work done, but because insurance is awesome, I can't do it at the same place, so we're gonna go to another location so I can get the blood work done. Hooray for me. And I'm getting angry looks at old people. Sometimes when I park in like handicapped spaces, I get like mean looks from elderly or other disabled people because, you know, I guess I don't look disabled to them. Anyway, that really it irritates me, but it also creates a lot of stress because I feel like, again, what I was saying earlier, like expectations of me, like I feel like because of what I look like, you know, my age, and while I'm not a cover model, you know, I don't look terrible. Well, it depends on who you ask, right? Anyway, but I don't always look disabled, but how do I tell people that I feel really weak today and I can feel my entire skeleton because all of my joints hurt? And, you know, like today is actually like a pretty bad day physically. I really feel terrible and I'm in a lot of pain. And the knee, of course. And so mobility and getting around is like a whole thing. And I really should be using a mobility aid like a cane or something. But again, I feel, I don't know. I shouldn't even let people's opinions matter because I am all about rejecting who people think I ought to be. But still, it is a little uncomfortable when I feel people judging me for having a handicap placard and parking in a handicap spot when really it's none of their business and they don't know my story. And I have to remember the same thing that I would tell any of you. If you were to tell me that happened to you, I'd say, don't worry about them. Your needs matter, whether other people understand your needs or not. And I have to remember that that applies to me too. Done with my labs. I think we've earned a cup of coffee. So I decided before we go to the coffee shop to get coffee, I wanted to go to the bookstore and be surrounded by books. I don't know, it just feels like a good thing, you know? And then one of the things I like to do when I get labs done is replace the boring Band-Aid with something a little bit more on brand, if you will. So, see? Now I just have a unicorn sticker on my arm. It's the little silly things that gets us through life, right? Especially when dealing with things like health issues. Ugh. All right, let's go wander around books. I don't usually impulse buy books, but I impulse bought this book, Don't Let the Forest In, by C.G. Drews. I know nothing about the author. I've never even heard of this book before, but it said, the quote at the top, the cover is beautiful. And then the quote at the top says, beautiful, horrific, perfect for any reader who has looked into the sharp mouths of disturbing fairy tales and found themselves entirely at home. It's like the book was written for me. I don't even know what's in the book, but if that's what they're saying about the book, I had to have it and I had to read it. But apparently it's like two friends. One writes fairy tales, apparently pretty dark ones, and then his friend is an artist, an illustrator. So they're one's writing stories, the other one's drawing images to go with. Oh, it just sounds like the perfect friendship. And the book is beautiful. And I've just had a garbage last few weeks, and I feel like garbage today. And I have tons of books to read, but I'm very excited about this. So we're going to go to a coffee shop and drink coffee and devour this book. So that is the last appointment for the day. We are done. Let's go home. A book that I've been reading recently that's really been making me think about this whole some English breakfast tea for you thing, but this balancing out, understanding who I am, but also acknowledging that I feel compelled to be who other people think I ought to be. What was I saying? Oh, this book I'm reading. I'm sorry, brain not braining today. It's actually like a series of lectures from the great courses called Essential Social Psychology by who is it? Hang on. Wind Goodfriend. It's from like the Great Courses, that site that has like a lot of lectures and stuff by professors. And Professor Goodfriend talks about social psychology, and one of the things that's talked about is the discrepancy between who we are and who we want to be and who we think we're supposed to be. And depending on how you were raised or where your culture where you live, that self-discrepancy theory, that's what it's called. That urge, that need to belong could be very strong. And I know based on comments and conversations we've had around this before, for some of you, it is the only things you concern yourself with is who you are and who you want to be, and who society or family or whoever you think you ought to be is like irrelevant. You've learned how to stop thinking about that. And that's something I'm working on, and I'm on that path because and I've realized, in the past when a friend or a random person or whoever, tells me that I've, lost my man card because I love pretty teacups, or I lost my black card because I did something that's, whatever I did that did not fit the narrow box that I'm supposed to fit in, is them telling me that I am failing in who I ought to be. And for a long time, that created a lot of stress for me because I felt like I had to be, in order to be safe, I had to be who other people thought that I ought to be. And which of course is not true, because like, where does that even come from? And who gives anyone the right to tell you who you ought to be? And I'm not talking about behaviors that allow you to be, a contributing member of society or to be safe and empathetic to those around you. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, things that are arbitrary and have nothing to do with whether or not your actions hurt yourself or others. I want to be very clear about that, because, I ought to use my turn signals, but that's not about who I am. That is about how I interact with the world around me while I'm out around other people, if that makes sense. But a lot of my stress, like I said, has been around the fact that I do not fit who I ought to be in so many ways. And that was, I would be really upset about that. And I felt like I was a failure as a human being. And a lot of it was making me wonder if I should even exist at all, because I'm failing in that. And there was this scene in Endgame between Thor and his mother.
Everyone fails at who they're supposed to be, Thor. The measure of a person, of a hero, is how well they succeed at being who they are.
And I loved that. That acknowledgement that we all fail at who we're supposed to be. But what matters is how successful we are at being who we are. And whether that means that who we are is disabled or a genius or a writer or a dancer or whatever it is, there is this voice in my head and in my heart that is growing louder every day, that reminds me that what matters is who I am and who I aspire to be, and that I don't need to worry about who I ought to be, because that is more about pleasing other people than about fully embracing myself and bringing my true gifts to the world. So, how about you? Do you struggle with that discrepancy of self between who you aspire to be, who you perceive yourself to be right now, and who other people believe that you ought to be? Does that affect your ability to live your life, to manage your health? Let me know. And also share, do you have any resources or suggestions on how to navigate that? What helped, for those of you who are in that space where you are who you are and you don't even worry about who other people think you ought to be? How did you get there? And what advice would you give to those like myself that are on the path to being where you are? All right, friends. I love you. As always, thank you for being here. If you're still watching the video at this point, thank you so much. I appreciate your presence here. I appreciate your comments and you sharing your stories. It makes me feel less alone, and it's nice to have people on this little island of misfit toys with me. All right, friends, it's time for your next adventure. I'll miss you. Cheers.